You think solitary confinement is cruel? The Byzantines had a punishment where they'd sew you inside a rotting donkey carcass, just your head sticking out, and leave you in the desert sun to be eaten alive by maggots and insects burrowing through decaying flesh into your skin. And that wasn't even their worst prison sentence. For over 1,000 years, the Byzantine Empire perfected the art of keeping people alive while making them wish they were dead. The question isn't how anyone survived Byzantine prisons, it's how anyone kept their sanity long enough to tell the tale. Before we descend into this nightmare, do something for me. If you believe history isn't just dates and dead emperors, but the raw, brutal, unfiltered truth of human cruelty disguised as justice, smash that like button. Subscribe, because we're not just reciting textbook facts, we're uncovering the blood-soaked reality they definitely didn't teach you in school. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and whether you could survive even one day of what you're about to hear. Now, let's descend into the darkest dungeons of the most sophisticated torture state the medieval world ever produced. Welcome to the Numera. Picture this: Constantinople, 867 AD. You've been accused of plotting against Emperor Basil I. Doesn't matter if you're guilty or not. Two executioner's guards grab you at dawn, drag you through the Forum of Constantine while crowds spit at you, and throw you down a narrow stone staircase that smells like death mixed with human waste, and something else you can't identify but makes your eyes water. Welcome to the Numera, the Byzantine Empire's special gift to anyone who annoyed the wrong person at court. The Numera wasn't just one prison. It was a network of underground cells beneath the imperial palace. And according to the chronicler Theophanes the Confessor, some of these chambers had not seen sunlight since Constantine the Great built them in 330 AD. We're talking 5 centuries of accumulated human misery soaked into limestone walls. The Byzantines didn't believe in rehabilitation. They believed in breaking you so thoroughly that even if you got out, you'd never be the same person again. Here's what your average cell looked like: 7 feet by 5 feet, smaller than a modern parking space. No windows, no bed. Stone floor covered in a layer of slime that's part condensation, part blood, part bodily fluids from the last occupant who probably died there. The only light comes from a small grated opening in the iron door, and the only ventilation is whatever air manages to creep down from somewhere above, carrying with it the screams of other prisoners. But here's the thing that really separates Byzantine prisons from your typical medieval dungeon. They were organized, documented, bureaucratic. The Byzantines kept records of everything. The Cleterologion of Philotheos from 899 AD actually lists the different categories of prisoners and their designated suffering levels. They had a whole administrative system for human torture. It's like they created the world's first database management system, except instead of tracking inventory, they were tracking how many days until a prisoner went completely insane. The science of sensory destruction. Now let's talk about what made Byzantine imprisonment uniquely horrible. They understood psychology before psychology existed. These weren't barbarians randomly throwing people in holes. These were the intellectual descendants of Rome, and they'd spent centuries perfecting techniques that destroyed your mind while keeping your body functional enough to continue suffering. The first technique? Complete sensory deprivation mixed with sensory overload. Imagine you're in that cell in total darkness for days. Can't see your own hand in front of your face. Your brain starts playing tricks. You see shapes that aren't there. You hear voices. Then, without warning, guards slam open your door at what you think is midnight, blast you with torchlight that feels like knives in your eyes, and scream questions at you in Greek, Latin, and Armenian simultaneously until you can't remember your own name. According to Michael Sellos, an 11th century Byzantine historian, this technique was called the confusion, and it could break a man's grip on reality in less than a week. Then there's the water situation. Not waterboarding. That's too quick, too merciful. The Byzantines would give you exactly enough water to survive, delivered on a completely random schedule, sometimes twice a day, sometimes once every 3 days. Your entire existence becomes obsessing over when the next cup comes. You can't sleep because what if they come while you're asleep and you miss it? You can't think about escape, can't think about family, can't think about anything except that next cup of water. It's like they gamified your survival instinct and then rigged the game. And the food? When they bothered to feed you, it was usually a mixture called prison bread, wheat husks, sawdust, and just enough actual grain to keep you alive. The Byzantine legal code, the Basilica, actually specified that prisoners should receive sufficient sustenance to maintain life but insufficient for comfort. They literally codified calculated misery into law. The Byzantines were basically the first civilization to weaponize nutrition science. The blinding chambers. But if you really made the emperor angry, if you were a political rival or a failed rebel, you didn't stay in the regular cells. You got promoted to something much worse, the blinding chambers. And yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. Blinding was the Byzantine Empire's signature punishment, and they turned it into an art form. Unlike other medieval societies that just executed rivals, the Byzantines had a problem. According to their laws, a physically mutilated person couldn't claim the throne. So instead of execution, they destroy your eyes and let you live as a warning to everyone else. It was political neutralization with a side of psychological terrorism. Here's how it worked. They'd strap you to a bronze chair in a special room beneath the chalk gate of the imperial palace. A specialist, because of course they had specialists, would heat a bronze bowl until it glowed red. Then they'd press it directly against your open eyes. The heat wouldn't just blind you, it would boil the fluid inside your eyeballs and the smell. Witnesses described it as similar to burning pork mixed with sulfur. Sometimes they'd use red-hot pokers instead, one for each eye, taking their time. The goal wasn't just blindness, it was maximum suffering during the process. Emperor Constantine VI found this out in 797 AD when his own mother, Empress Irene, had him blinded. The historical accounts from Theophanes say his screams could be heard across the palace grounds, and the blinding was so brutal that he died from the trauma. His mother became the first woman to rule the Byzantine Empire in her own right. Mother's Day was probably awkward in that family, but here's the truly disturbing part. Sometimes they'd deliberately botch the blinding. They'd burn your eyes just enough to cause permanent damage, but leave you with vague shadows and light perception. Why? Because total blindness was too merciful. They wanted you to see just enough to know what you'd lost, to watch blurry shapes of the world you could no longer participate in. It's like installing a preview of hell, with just enough detail to torture you, but not enough to navigate. The silent death of the Animas dungeons. If blinding was too public, too quick, too merciful for your crime, they'd send you to the Animas dungeons, and this is where things get properly nightmarish. Built in the 11th century as part of the Blaherne Palace complex, the Animas prison was designed for people the empire wanted to forget existed. These weren't cells. They were vertical shafts carved into bedrock, some dropping 40 feet straight down. Guards would lower you on a rope, and once you hit bottom, that's it. No rope to climb, no footholds, just smooth stone walls and whatever was already down there, which usually meant the decomposing bodies of previous occupants. The 12th century historian Nicetas Choniates wrote about a nobleman named Theodore Stipiotes, who was lowered into an animas shaft in 1185 and forgotten. When they finally pulled him out 7 years later, he'd gone completely feral, couldn't speak coherent words, and had apparently survived by eating rats and licking moisture off the walls. The darkness in these shafts was absolute, not dim, not dark, absolute absence of light. Your eyes stay wide open trying to see anything, but there's nothing. After a few weeks, your circadian rhythm collapses. You can't tell if you've been down there for hours or days. Time becomes meaningless. Some prisoners would scream constantly just to hear something, anything, until their voices gave out. Others would go completely silent, retreating so far into their own minds that even if they were eventually released, they never really came back. And the Byzantines knew exactly what they were doing. The Animas prison was located directly beneath the imperial audience chambers. While the emperor held court upstairs, discussing theology and receiving foreign ambassadors in gold and marble splendor, men were starving in the dark 40 feet below. It was a physical manifestation of Byzantine power, civilization and barbarism occupying the same space, separated by just a few feet of stone. Chains, restraints, and creative cruelty. Now let's talk about the restraints, because the Byzantines didn't just throw you in a cell and call it a day. They had an entire catalog of chains, shackles, and restraint devices that would make modern maximum security prisons look like summer camp. The standard setup was the double chain, one iron collar around your neck, connected by a short chain to manacles on your wrists. But here's the cruel genius. The chain was just short enough that you couldn't fully extend your arms or lower them completely. You're stuck in this permanent half-raised position that doesn't seem that bad for the first hour. By day 2, your shoulders are screaming. By week 2, the muscles have started to atrophy in that position. Prisoners who wore double chains for months would be permanently deformed even after release, shoulders locked in that unnatural posture. Then there was the boot, a wooden contraption that locked both legs together at the ankles and knees. You couldn't walk, couldn't stand, could barely crawl. Byzantine guards would tighten the bolts a little more each week, gradually crushing your leg bones. The historian John Skylitzes recorded that a rebel named Bardas Phocas spent 3 years in the boot, and when they finally released him, both his legs had to be amputated, because the bones had essentially fused into useless clubs of scar tissue. But the restraint that really shows Byzantine creativity? The Iron Maiden position. And no, not the spiked coffin from medieval legend. This was worse because it was real. They'd chain your wrists to a ring in the ceiling just high enough that you could touch the floor with your toes if you stretched. Then they'd leave you there for days. The choice was simple: stand on your toes until your calves give out, or hang by your wrists and feel your shoulders slowly dislocate. According to Leo the Deacon's historical chronicles, some prisoners would hang like this for so long that their hands would turn black and gangrenous, requiring amputation, which the Byzantines would perform without anesthesia, in the cell, with a heated blade to cauterize the wound and then chain you back up. It's like they sat down and asked, how can we make the human body torture itself? And then they wrote down the answer and made it official policy. When torture becomes entertainment. Here's something they definitely don't teach in history class. Byzantine prison torture wasn't always hidden away in dungeons. Sometimes it was public entertainment, and the crowds loved it. The Hippodrome of Constantinople, famous for chariot races, occasionally doubled as an execution ground where they'd bring out prisoners for public discipline. The Chronicle of Theophanes describes an event in 713 AD where Emperor Philippicus had 20 political prisoners brought to the Hippodrome, chained to posts, and publicly flogged while announcers explained their crimes to the crowd. We're talking 70,000 spectators watching men being whipped until their backs looked like raw meat, and the crowd cheering like it was a sporting event. The Byzantines called this correction through public witness, which is just a fancy way of saying, let's traumatize criminals and entertain citizens at the same time. It's like they invented reality TV 11 centuries early, except the contestants didn't volunteer, and the prize for losing was death or mutilation. One particularly disturbing practice was the cart of shame. Prisoners sentenced to mutilation would be paraded through the streets of Constantinople in an open cart before their punishment. The route went from the prison, through the Maze, the main street, past the Forum of Constantine, and ended at the execution ground near the Golden Gate. The journey took about 2 hours, and citizens would line the streets throwing garbage, rotten food, and sometimes stones at the prisoners. According to Anna Komnene, the Byzantine princess and historian, these parades were so popular that vendors would set up along the route selling food and wine, like it was a festival. Imagine knowing that in 2 hours you're going to be blinded or have your nose cut off, and spending those 2 hours being pelted with filth by people who used to be your neighbors, while others literally have a picnic watching your misery. It's psychological torture as a warm-up to physical torture, and the Byzantines understood that breaking your spirit was just as important as breaking your body. The ones who survived. But here's what's truly remarkable. Some people survived this nightmare and lived to tell about it. And their stories reveal just how deeply Byzantine imprisonment scarred people, even decades after their release. Take John Italos, the 11th century philosopher. He was imprisoned in 1082 for heresy, basically for teaching philosophy that the church didn't approve of. He spent 7 years in the Numera prison in conditions so brutal that when he was finally released, he developed what we'd now recognize as severe PTSD. According to his own writings, he couldn't sleep in enclosed spaces for the rest of his life. Even 30 years after his release, he insisted on sleeping outside, claiming that walls and ceilings made him feel like he was suffocating. The prison had literally rewired his brain's response to architecture. Then there's the case of Michael Carolarios, who later became Patriarch of Constantinople. Before his rise to power, he was imprisoned by Emperor Constantine IX in 1040 for political conspiracy. He spent 18 months in the Animas dungeons, and when he emerged, witnesses said he looked like a walking corpse, skeletal, hair completely white despite being only 40 years old, and with a 1,000-yard stare that made people uncomfortable. But here's the thing. He channeled that trauma into religious fervor and eventually became one of the most powerful religious figures in Byzantine history. He famously excommunicated the Pope in 1054, splitting Christianity into Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. You have to wonder if spending a year and a half in hell makes you more willing to tell the Pope to go to hell. But most prisoners weren't so successful. Byzantine sources mention the released ones who would wander Constantinople's streets, former prisoners so broken by their experience that they couldn't reintegrate into society. They'd sleep in doorways, flinch at sudden movements, and talk to people who weren't there. The Byzantines had no concept of mental health treatment, so these men were just left to wander as living warnings of what happened when you crossed the empire. The prison economy you've never heard of. And here's a final twist that shows just how systematically corrupt Byzantine prisons were. There was an entire underground economy around them. Guards would sell privileges to prisoners who could afford them. A few gold coins might buy you a blanket. More money could get you actual food instead of prison bread. Enough wealth could even buy you a cell with a window, or reduce your chains from the double chain to simple manacles. The Basilica legal code actually had provisions trying to prevent this corruption, which tells you it was widespread enough to require official prohibition. It didn't work. Prison guard was a low-paying position, and guards supplemented their income by essentially running a protection racket inside the Empire's dungeons. Pay up or get the basement shaft. Pay up or we forget to bring your water ration. And if you died in prison, your body became another commodity. Families had to pay to retrieve corpses for proper burial. If they couldn't pay, you'd be thrown into a mass grave outside the city walls with other unclaimed bodies. The Byzantines were so efficient at processing death that they had standardized procedures for disposal of prisoner corpses, complete with documentation and official seals. It's like they built the world's first prison industrial complex, except instead of profit motive, it was powered by political terror and bureaucratic efficiency. They turned human suffering into a functioning government department with career paths and record keeping. So remember that opening image, being sewn inside a donkey carcass? That actually happened to a rebel named Basil the Copper Hand in 932 AD, according to the continuation of Theophanes. And after everything we've covered, after all the sensory deprivation, the blinding chambers, the animus shafts, the public humiliation, and the systematic psychological destruction, that donkey carcass almost seems merciful, because at least it was over in a few days. The Byzantine Empire lasted over 1,000 years. And for most of that millennium, its prisons functioned as efficient machines for converting human beings into broken shells. They didn't need to execute everyone. They just needed to make sure that anyone who challenged imperial power, anyone who stepped out of line, anyone who made the wrong enemy at court, would serve as a living reminder of what happens when you fail. Next time you complain about jury duty or parking tickets, remember that Byzantine justice meant there was a professional bureaucracy dedicated to calculating exactly how much suffering you could endure before dying. They had specialists, they had documentation, they had government positions with official titles and salaries for people whose job was to perfect your misery. Which moment from this nightmare shocked you most? The blinding chambers? The animus shafts? The prison economy? Drop it in the comments. And if this made you grateful that the worst punishment you'll probably face is a fine or community service, hit that subscribe button for more historical horrors that'll make your worst day look like a vacation. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll explore the even more disturbing medical practices of Byzantine physicians. Until then, maybe appreciate that your definition of confinement is probably just a boring meeting, not a vertical stone shaft filled with corpses and rats. Stay grateful, stay curious, and remember, we live in the good timeline.